Please, if you've just walked in, grab yourself a cup of coffee as we will have this conversation in the next 50 to 60 minutes. And before I go any further, allow me to welcome my guests and give them a chance to introduce themselves. And let me start with Alfred. Alfred, good evening. You could introduce yourself to those who have joined us this evening.
Good evening, members. I'm called Alfred Yet. I'm a coffee premium, also a very senior economist. So welcome to this broadcast as we try to have a conversation on what the moderator and the host has just said about the coffee politics around the globe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I have shared a number of platforms with Alfred, and we keep talking about the economy of northern Uganda and particularly Acholi district and how we can shape it. Allow me also to invite Professor Dr. Daniel Omakech. Can you introduce yourself to the guest? I think you could use the microphone. It should be on. Maybe we can use this little microphone.
The moderator, thank you. Komakech Daniel is my name. I'm in Acholi University, director of research.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me start with you, Professor. Last week we were looking at the merger between Uganda Coffee Development Authority and Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries. And you said I was now turning political. And I think today is when we dive deep into the political aspects of coffee in this country. Over the last 2 or 3 years, what is your take on how the coffee narrative has been approached politically in this country? Where is coffee in the political decision-making space?
Thank you, moderator. When you ask this question, in a sense, I visualize the conversation that went on in the Parliament of Uganda on the merger. I appreciate the debate in the Parliament, but I also noticed there was a gap. The gap was that we simply looked at coffee as a crop. But we missed out to appreciate that coffee is not just a crop, it's a political crop. And so the matter was not simply a technical scenario, it was also political. Is this the first time we are merging? Is it the first time we are bringing the matter of coffee in Parliament? No. And so building on that, I would say that the conversation in Parliament must have appreciated first that coffee was not simply a crop, but a political crop. Having said this, I want to follow up this, looking into the evolution of coffee in the political administration of this country. In 1894, when Uganda became a British protectorate, the first instance of introducing Uganda to coffee, or coffee in Uganda, was brought in by Captain Luo, who was then heading the East African Imperial British Company. But the problem here was that there was no established structures. So it's staggered. But you need to know this was not introduced by the British, but that we marketed and capitalized coffee. Already you know by the 1880s coffee was growing wide within the bank of Victoria. So I mistook to do coffee was introduced into the 1906. The British did not introduce coffee as a beverage. Coffee was introduced as a cash crop to fund the colonization. So I want to pose together with us at this point that coffee was not grown as a beverage only. It was grown as an economy to help in the colonization. So we begin to see the role coffee played to an extent that by 1925, Uganda was exporting coffee to a point that 1% of the colonial GDP was funded. And at that time, 1% was a beautiful contribution to the GDP. And that increased in the 1970s when the economy of Uganda collapsed with Amin. The only crop that was sustained was coffee. So the administration of Amin emphasized and protected and secured the production of coffee. And the coffee rate increased from 1% to 4% in the growth of the GDP of this country. That went on in the 1970s. But around 1925 to 1954, the British colonial government created a strong infrastructure around coffee. One of them was the Coffee Marketing Board. Now, in the minds of the British, emerging from the First World War, 1914, 1918, with an impressive growth of 1% in the GDP, that was important, the post-First World War British. The economy had been shattered, the 1% contribution from Uganda was enormous. And that actually continued up to 1940s in the Second World War. So coffee played the stabilization perspective of the British Empire. Coffee also played a role in funding the expenses of governing the colonial government, particularly in this country. When Amin collapsed, Obote II was transitional. And so 1985, 1986, when national resistance movement came to power, the economy was in tatters. Again, we look to coffee. And as a result, in 1992, we shifted from Coffee Marketing Board to Coffee Development Authority. The idea was to minimize waste, expedite production, and emphasize on better markets, better taxes. So we shifted from Coffee Marketing Board to Coffee Development. The perspective here was not only production, but was also to jumpstart the economy after the overthrow of the true government. Again, it is coffee. So at this point, I want to pause with this statement. Coffee is not just a crop. Coffee is a people.
Thank you very much. We also saw that the Uganda Coffee Marketing Board, which made that transition to Uganda Coffee Development Authority. Given the political history of coffee in this country, we realized that growing of coffee was also very central to Uganda. You vividly talked about the 1900 Uganda Agreement and IBEA, or IBEA company, that was here previously. Was this only an agenda that was stuck to Uganda? Where was the rest of the country in this spectrum?
Moderator, 1900, the understanding of the British was that we had a firm control of Uganda and other treaty kingdoms. Remember, after the 1900 Uganda Agreement, it was then classified that we can actually create a treaty with the kingdoms that were established. So immediately after Uganda, we went to Acholi, Toro, and on what is called the treaty kingdoms. But as the British said the food, the problem was the cause of colonial administration in the kingdom or treaty kingdoms. And what do we mean by treaty kingdoms is that we have an agreement with the kingdoms. And in particular, you had the Uganda, you had the Lesotho, you had the Bunyoro, you had Acholi, you had the Toro, and on and on. So the cost of administration was increasingly becoming a barrier. And that is exactly why in the 1900s, or from 1900 to 1925, coffee was introduced, not as beverage, but as a cash crop to offset the cost of the administration. And so you begin to see the pattern of coffee growing. It was around the corridors of the treaty kingdoms. The assumption of the British was that if we can grow as much coffee, concentrate coffee effort around these treaty kingdoms, we could get as much money to run the kingdoms and to run Uganda now as the British and the colonial area. Fortunately, by 1925, as we said, the GDP of the colonial government was 1% of the power. So it was a beautiful report. Now, it did not recover in the mind of the British that they needed to extend the coffee production. For a very simple reason, that the British kingdoms are needed to be intensified in the coffee production and the coffee marketing. And to extend it to the broader scale of Uganda would be also another reason. So, as it were, coffee now became predominantly the treaty kingdoms, as it has historically been. North later on was preserved as a labor a space, as it were. So in a sense, you begin to see how coffee gets restricted around the areas. But of course, to restrict, you didn't need only the restriction, you needed the narrative to help you with this restriction. The narrative was that the North and elsewhere were not good. And we swallowed this narrative, which we are only beginning to disrupt or recently.
Thank you, Professor. Finally, before I move to Alfred, I want to, we've talked about pre-colonial time, post-independence, to the economic crisis of the 1970s under the leadership of Idi Amin Dada, and also Obote II. But also we have seen post-1986. And allow me to specifically look at the cooperatives, which were very instrumental in coffee farming, in coffee marketing, but there was a collapse or abolishment of cooperative, and many Ugandans saw this as a political move to sabotage the regions that were predominantly growing coffee. What is your take, especially in Mugisu was one case? I remember over time, Nandala Mafami was raising this, and I think it's part of this. Exactly. So, what is your take on the collapse of the cooperatives in this country, growing up coffee farming in this country?
Particularly when we construct coffee as a political crop, then you appreciate how the national resistance movement at the time of entry to power had some skepticism how to deal with the coffee production and coffee marketing. The entry the beginning of the M&M government, we all know that the beginning is a bit fragile. There were a number of oppositions to the new government of national resistance movement. You had the Federal, which in a sense had an alliance that it was a ship, and predominantly it was Uganda. You had resistance in northern Uganda. You had resistance in Teso and on and on. So, as a government, you needed to understand the fragility in which you find yourself, but also appreciate that the crops like coffee as a political crop would also be used to fund development. So you needed to restrict circulation, you needed to restrict marketing. And in the process of restricting, the cooperative would not find itself, and so found itself.
Thank you very much. Let me get to Alfred. From what Professor said, is that coffee was seen as predominantly a central Uganda crop. But recently, in the zoning, they realized that northern Uganda also has a lot of potential. And I think districts like Mwea, districts like Amur were earmarked for coffee crops. And I'm also very glad to see that we have many coffee farmers coming up in these particular districts. And we're beginning to see the results of coffee farming in this particular region. Now, every time the president is making the State of the Nation address, and every time they are reading the budget, I always pay attention to how many times a particular commodity is mentioned, either in the budget or in the State of the Nation address. I also pay attention to how many times the word Acholi is mentioned, either in the national budget or in the State of the Nation address. And I think those are three, which I think this space is beneficial. Emphasize coffee growing in this part of the country, but also coffee consumption in this part of the country. How has this business been able to maneuver through all these political decisions, especially for you, sir?
Thank you so much, Brother Bernard, Professor. I want to begin by saying that, and I will also emphasize that coffee is not a kind of a white, it's not a kind of a white crop. Coffee is an African crop. If you look at the history of coffee economy, first and foremost, Robusta is back from Uganda, where Robusta was discovered from Uganda, and Arabica was from Ethiopia. In Acholi here by the, we should not be calling coffee wine. Wine is the Ugandan language. The original name for coffee in Acholi is supposed to be called Omen. Omen, O-M-E-N. Omen, because it was growing in the wilderness. But then, our people did not understand, did not know it. However, the people in the central region, they have been introduced to it. They have organized them to understand it. Now, coming to what you have asked me about how has this particular business maneuvered through the businesses and the politics around the coffee. All this comes as a result of being a strategic thinker, a strategic businessman. If you are thinking business, you must be able to align yourself to a national development plan. When you align yourself, you create an idea that is interested by the government in developing it. And that is what exactly made this place be the beneficiaries of our government. Now, as Inspire Africa Coffee, we have begun a dream and a vision that we are not afraid to dream that kind of dream. our dream is to cause a disruption or a coffee renaissance in Africa. And a renaissance whereby no one else has ever dreamed such a dream. Our dream was to complete all the value chain of coffee and to align all the coffee-related addition to the GDP. How can we align coffee to influence tourism, which is how can we align coffee to influence maybe the airline industry? How can we align coffee to influence all sectors within the economy? So we came up with a big dream to cause what is called African Coffee Renaissance. The Renaissance, it doesn't only apply that we are looking at farmers or the farm gate kind of activities. What we are looking at is a complete value chain. So if you come up with a big dream like that, I always keep telling young people who are part of this big vision that we should not be a generation who fears dreaming big. We should dream the kind of dreams where people are afraid to dream. Then we allow faith, or we allow them to operate and try to finance it. And that's what we want to see. And that is what made us to begin looking at things to do with so many coffee value chain, coffee tourism, and the rest of the things. So, what we are only trying to see is that as Inspire Africa, we are trying to come up with decolonizing the old coffee model, the old coffee ideology, which has been brought up by the Western world, which Professor has just said it right now, whereby they only want us to be a source of raw material. Professor has already clearly spoken about it. Right now, as it stands, the contribution of coffee to Ugandan GDP is now about 3% of the GDP. But initially, we have begun with 1% during the British days. There was a negative disruption which disrupted it, as he has spoken during political influence. But right now, it has shot up. We now contribute as a coffee sector up to about 3% of the total GDP. My Uganda no coffee don't make around percent, around 10. That is normal. What you can make. Now, why are we able to maneuver through all this political kind of confusion and interruption to the coffee value chain? All this come to be a strategic thing that we align ourselves with the National Development Plan, and then we share our vision to the caretakers of the state. Because this it has been made a political crop. This has made us be, because of the right vision, it has made us be supported ideologically, financially, and so forth. So, this is not only supposed to be an idea to be benefited, Inspire Africa Coffee Company. Anybody who is dreaming big, anybody who is having an idea, you are supposed to be supported, supposed to be fine. Either it's supposed to be private to private kind of support, or private to government support. If you have the right vision, you can be. Now, coming down to what Prof has just been talking about, how coffee has been made a political crop, and how government is coming in to protect it. All the noise which you have been hearing about UCDA to whatsoever, or whatsoever, all those kind of things there, which we have been seeing this year, all this is still down into the colonialist mentality. The colonial economy, now we are trying to decolonize it. Why the noise was there is because the West still want us to continue supplying them with raw material. So if they see we are going in the direction which they are doing in the Western world, what will they do? What they will do is to use the people who are not yet visionary enough to push the African agenda, to come and cause that disruption, to come and bring the noise so that it brings what is called confusion in the sector. And we have seen this so many others. And you have because it's a political crop, you have had the president talking about that. We have ideas of Western imperialists who are trying to disrupt what is taking place. Because Germany doesn't even have a single tree of coffee, but they're the biggest beneficiary, the biggest they get the biggest advantage that comes from coffee. So you look at what they want us to do is to continue supplying them with raw material. Now, if they see we as Ugandans going in the direction of completing all the value chain of coffee, they will not be happy. They will have to fight back. I want to give you, in the whole world right now, the coffee prices are being controlled by cartels. And we have about 25 cartels companies who are controlling the coffee prices right now. I can mention some few of them. We have Unilever, Starbucks, we have the LL Corporation, we have Lugi also make coffee machine. They make espresso machine like one you see in the coffee shop. And then we also have Good Life Coffee. There's also what is called there's some Good Death Wish Coffee, something to do with that. So they control, those are cartel companies who are controlling the coffee. How do they control it? They control it on two things only by them. One is through oil. These guys, they have the biggest store that can store the whole coffee in the world quicker for over 2 years. So how do they do that? When they buy all the coffees and they store it in their coffee in their storage, they will bring in the narrative now. The coffee price has fallen because of the Brazil now coming into production, because of Vietnam coming into production. Now this one will bring us to the second variable which they use to control the coffee prices. That is being in charge of many governments all over the world. These companies are so big in a way whereby they even fund very, very big governments all over the world. So what they say is that they tell you, Uganda, we are going to support you with this. All what we want is keep selling the wrong narrative to farmers. I think 3 years ago, I remember I was in the first meeting of starting it, where we had a meeting in Jinda, Minister's Village. I was in that meeting, and then they formed something called Coffee Investment Consortium. They formed in the areas of coffee. Now, where all the coffee actors came together, they are still supported in terms of giving them export license. They have been given in terms of helping them with diplomatic advantage, whereby he goes ahead, the person goes ahead and negotiate area in the Middle East, Russia, which has led to very, very bilateral agreement, export license being given. So far, right now, I've seen US has refused, but Canada accepted. Russia did, Serbia did, gave it to us. Dubai gave it to us. In the Middle East, we have Saudi also gave it to us. Nigeria gave it to us. And in Uganda, in East Africa here, Rwanda also accepted us to Acholi. And then Somalia also accepted. So you find that through PASEC, some initiative, people like we have this lady in Kapchora who are benefited from that, Inspire to benefited from that. We have this one called Saxi Coffee by Dr. Frederick Gisha from West Uganda, who benefited from that. And then in Acholi here, PASEC has helped in initiative of export. I've seen Jokana in terms of SIMSIM. They signed last month, I think. They signed an MOU with some Chinese company to export. I am a member of the consortium. I paid 10 million shillings to be a member. But because my coffee company is still young, I not yet started massive production, I couldn't be given a leeway to take the lead country. The only place right now I'm selling to is supplying molds in Nairobi with some coffee company which is called Oyete Coffee. About 6-7 molds in Nairobi. That's where I really encourage that for this impact we felt in Acholi, we should not be aloof. We have people like Their Coffee, we need to be involved. I would think if through this kind of engagement, we can arrange all the coffee stakeholders within Acholi sub-region, we have our conversations on here. Then we come up with our policy outlay, how we want it to be influenced, so that we can also be given a leeway to export. not only listening from Kampala. That would be good, Mr. Bennett. I know you are very good with that. So, reading the budget and looking at the balance of payment position of Uganda, you have seen that percent has really enabled an increment in the export earning of the country at the moment. Because of that kind of initiative there. If you are exporting something little, that means there was an increment. Because so many companies now have got a license with good bilateral agreement. It has made so many of the companies to be able to export their things. That is one thing I've seen. So it has really helped, yes, through that passive kind of initiative.
Okay, thank you very much. We are running out of our time. I want to ask Professor the same initiative like passive of portrait to try and recently we had an exhibition in Dubai, an exhibition in Serbia. We go to countries to try and have a global influence and position our export to ensure that we have a balance of trade, but also innovatively penetrate new markets. Already we have Germany, we have Italy, we have part of Asia. So how do we then capitalize on initiative like passive that Godric Bobo has been championing in as far as coffee is concerned? How can that be a game changer to especially coffee farmers in this country? Such an initiative.
Again, I want to go back to the story that the boosting point of Uganda's production,
which is the Asian countries and the rest of the thing. These cartels sit down in the boardroom. When they see that their storage is getting empty, they bring in those two variables which I mentioned, ordinary and then selling wrong variable. So that the cook prices drop, farmers begin, and this kind of thing as an economist also. We practice it in something which is called economics of military warfare. And I've been seeing it in Acholi. People who buy seats in camp, they pay all the registration in Acholi and the TV station. Then what they do, they tell them that you be reading this announcement and news that the seats price has fallen. And then the farmers, the layman down here will now say, okay, since it has fallen, the middleman now comes and says, you know what? The seats price has fallen. Let me just help you, I buy it at 2,500 shillings. Because psychologically, they have made it enter in the mind of a citizen producer. So, that is the same narrative which these cartels are using. They don't care really. They don't care whatsoever a farmer benefits or whatsoever the farmer doesn't benefit. What they mind is maximizing profit from this coffee. So, this makes coffee really a political problem. Whereby, if you are engaging into coffee value chain, the government needs to come full board to protect the big dreamers in the coffee sector. Otherwise, they will be brought down by this cartel because they really control the world. Because when it comes to food, like Russia, it's cold. You go to the Western world, it's cold. So here in the cold weather like this, coffee becomes the deal. You get it? Now, the evidence of what I'm saying is the current price which fell is because of what I've just said. Why? If you look at from the current market, that is CAGR market. That's a global coffee regulatory market right now. You'll see that the price of capsules, the capsule coffee, the price of instant coffee. When you talk about instant coffee, it's this type one where this one where inspired is produced. They put it in the packet, whereby you just stir it and pour it in your water. Then you just start drinking straight away. Then the capsules are this one, they make it like in terms of tablet. You just drop it in water, the melt, and you start drinking. Or you put it in your coffee maker at home. That's what is called the capsule. The price of capsule right now, according to the CAGR market projection right now, it is projected to grow by about 6.73%. That was from the latest market statistics of yesterday. And it is actually contributing up to about $13.3 billion US. That is the current projection by 2030. So, if you look at that, you will find that the coffee needs to be regulated by government. If they don't regulate it by government, these cartels will leave farmers down here. Who is in Agabo and Baimon, who is behind Labon, who is in Noya, who is in Lamon in Kotika, who is in yet country, they can really be frustrated. You assume right now, coffee was being bought at the market. Right now, if you look at the market price of coffee, we have started the coffee is this one with the cover. It is at about 6,000 to 7,000 to 8,000 there. That is the range, the farm gate price. Then you come to maybe the fab. When you talk about fab coffee, it is fairly average, good quality coffee. It is about 11 to about 15,000. Then now you go to various grades. Druga is a dry, robusta or dry Arabica coffee, which is clean. You have grade clean, double A, class AA. You have the, for robusta there is also PH, R. All those grades now which are sold per kilo at Uganda shilling 22, either 25,000. The price are relaxed. If the government doesn't come, assuming a farmer who comes from farming, maintaining the farm, collecting it, drying it, handling it, pulping it, and as well now selling a clean green. Already then some of our cook stakeholders who go into secular processing of roasting and doing everything. Then people like inspired people who are born into tertiary production of changing it now to other forms like oil for smearing, lip balm for women, maybe medicine, the calculated medicine, well, those are tertiary production which are taking place. And that is what the Western world doesn't want.
Alfred, let me stay with you there.
Yes,
there is something called disruptive innovation in the market.
Yes, sir.
But also you speak about cartel. There's a very big politics in coffee pricing. You mentioned companies.
Yeah.
If you look at yesterday's New Vision,
Yes.
there's an article about what we are talking about. Yesterday's, I think there's a columnist who wrote extensively about coffee pricing and the cartel that is involved.
Yeah.
I would encourage all of us to read that particular article.
Absolutely.
It helps to inform the conversation that we are having now.
Absolutely.
And as we talk politics and this country, has there been an effort by our government or political leadership to intervene in the politics of coffee pricing, especially with these companies that are global major? We have some companies in South Africa.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
So what has been the effort by government and our political leadership to ensure that we intervene to protect the farmers?
The best right now government needs to do, they need to begin certain positive intervention to cause what is called a positive disruption in the coffee economy. How? One, by doing what is called subsidization of all what is taking place in the coffee sector. Maybe at farm level, maybe at production level, even at consumption level. Subsidies in terms of pesticide, in terms of fertilizer, so that the production costs are reduced. When production costs are reduced, the revenue generated will be a little high from the farmer. So that even when the cartel comes, the farmers will not feel the pain so much. So that even if the price is a little disrupted, when government comes in and subsidizes, the farmers will say, after all the government has subsidized us, maybe the loss is a little bigger. That is the first issue. Then two, there must be what is called policy reform in the coffee economy. Policy reform involves like what we discussed last Saturday. Bringing things like barista schools, roastery schools, which we don't have in the country. Bringing drinking coffee, promoting drinking policy. Like I've seen bad manners in Uganda where they say Inspire was given 9.something billion to teach Uganda how to drink coffee. They are not understanding what it really means, the magnitude. Ethiopia beats us because they drink more of their coffee than Uganda. The recent rank of us being given the big budget that we export more than any other country in Africa. Why can they rank us as the biggest drinker in Africa and the whole wide world? So some policy reform, like for example, starting coffee drinking clubs right from nursery to even tertiary institution. That can be there. Professor hinted it last week, whereby they said in Germany, some few people are already been, if you go in every department, there's a coffee machine. That is already an influence, policy a policy reform that the government needs to to be involved inside this. Then the third aspect is that the government really need to protect the actors who are trying to cause a disruption. When you talk about a disruption, it means they are trying to break the barriers of the ordinary condition which we are used to. That we get our coffee from the market, we put it in the juice bag, the 20 kilos juice bag, then we wait by going into roasting, packing, selling to the EU. Those are people who are causing a disruption in Uganda at the moment. If you look at, before I hang in my leg here, let's ask me one question. I want to give an example of the coffee economy in the cup. When you sell a cup of coffee of this nature, the person who is selling the milk will benefit from it. The person who is selling sugar will benefit from it. The person who is selling maybe coffee itself, roasted one, will benefit from it. And then also, some additives like honey will benefit from it. So if you add the price of milk, you add the price of coffee itself, the price of sugar itself, you find that if the raw coffee was supposed to sell a kilo at only about maybe, let us call it around $7, $7 or $6 like that, or even 13, which is about 50,000 Uganda shilling, you will find that a kilo of coffee when roasted, you're going to get about 100 of these espresso capsules. Now, when you value the market price from a shot of espresso, if you tabulate all the milk there, you find out a cup of espresso like this is enough to generate to even buy 1 kilo of coffee of raw milk. That is the kind of valuation the government need to try to improve.
Thank you very much, Alfred. Let me get to Professor. There has been, Alfred raises two issues. One, there's a saying in Uganda that coffee does not lie. And this is a common thing, like I said, that coffee does not lie. You can never go wrong with coffee. We want to look at the qualities of pricing coffee, especially that is Brazil and Vietnam. Now, every time we have excess coffee from Brazil and Vietnam, it affects global pricing. Why? It's because of the cartel involved, the companies that we mentioned them here, and they keep wanting. I asked Alfred what our government can do to ensure that we protect our space in the coffee business. Now, the cartel is at the global level, and sometimes because of their position, because of their wealth, and because of being very connected, it makes it difficult for our farmers and our marketers to go through some of the adults. I want to find out from you what could potentially influence this political pricing of coffee at a global level. How do we navigate through that to remain relevant in this space? Because right now, with the price of coffee, is at 2,500, chances are that you may use 1,500 shillings to get that coffee. And that seems to be a loss to the farmers now. And it has a direct bearing on the price of coffee. So how do we navigate through this cartel and all this global influence and the decision makers who determine the price of the coffee that we produce as a country?
Yeah, moderator, thank you. I'm not going to look at global price fluctuation from economics. I'll look at it more from politics. And the motivation for Uganda as a country to come in and resolve the fluctuation and whether it's necessary to intervene. Again, historically, you know, that already we've said by 1925 we were at 1%. Huge contribution to GDP. By 1974, 75, 76, we had risen to 6%. As the growth levels were impressive, there was also a political suppression. And I want to start from there to see the motivation for price control, fixing of prices, or suggesting that the fluctuation could go on without much political or state intervention. By 1948, Uganda as a region had 76% of the total production of coffee in this country. The rest were from the Treaty Kingdoms. But you also need to know that the first fight and mobilization against the colonial government of the British was around the land. The question was that the income from coffee that Uganda was getting empowered Uganda politically to start a mobilization against colonialism. In simple sense, coffee contributed in the struggle for independence, making coffee central to political agitation. But also, you need to know that by 1979, you had two tribes that were competing in terms of economy and also education. North, and specifically Acholi and Lamo, and West Uganda, or West Mengo. If West Mengo successfully taught in ordinary level examination, the North particularly, Acholi, and with the combination of Lamo, would have taken the advanced level. What was making Uganda competitive in education? Coffee. What was making Acholi and Lamo competitive in education? Cotton. Both of them were cash crops, inducing a particular economy and giving the strength to compete nationally in education. The contribution of Uganda in the case of Amin economically was from coffee. The contribution of Uganda in the toppling of Obote II government was from coffee. Coffee has been a constant in the political struggle itself. What does that mean? It means you have to move cautiously with the coffee. You also have to worry when the price of coffee is high, because the income will also be high, unless you are sure that the high income is not going to cause a political problem. Today we are dealing with another political issue in this country, championed by Uganda. Some will argue that there is a particular party that is championing this cause. But the party is also strong for reasons that the income and the funding from the indigenous is also strong. And when coffee becomes centrally political, one would imagine that high market value of coffee becomes also political focus. If you are a politician who sees the market value of coffee higher, and you are not sure about the political response of the population, you will be timid to negotiate more and better price. At this point, I'm not talking as an economically, I'm talking politically. So, when we begin to see some level of indifference, it is not that we are not responsible. It is only that we still want to know the political assurance that the increase in the prices, the increase in the income will not translate into political agitation. Should that be the case, then we may be a bit reluctant to negotiate better prices. What that means for Ugandans is to try very much to separate income from political agitation. If income becomes exclusively or fairly an economic, empowerment for growth and for development with less political agitation, I think we shall not be motivated politically to negotiate better prices.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'll throw this to both of you. Currently, we have an initiative on export promotion in this country. This is political. This is being run by Audrey Ramwogo. And the export promotion idea is to position our products in the global market, but also to negotiate space on how our products can compete fairly in the global space. I want to find out from Alfred, how is this working as far as coffee is concerned, the Audrey Ramwogo initiative? Have you seen any tangible impact from this?
I think, thank you so much, Bernard. I want to begin by saying, right now, there has been an increment in the contribution of coffee in terms of export earnings, from 20% to about 100% in the past 2 years.
Not have a motivation to get busy.
That's right.
What the British did was to flag a certain understanding of money economy. Money was driving the economy of the colonial government. So the youth in northern Uganda need to see the value of coffee campaign. When we were young in the villages, early in the morning, you'll go to a cotton garden because that was your school fees.
That's right.
That was the hospital bill.
That's right.
That was a livelihood. So what we have to do with the young people is to flag coffee within the narrative of money economy, that you can get money from coffee. And so much that can pay fees, that can help you to marry, that can help you to pay a number of bills. Until we understand this, the youth don't understand us.
That's right.
So my appeal is that we begin to start changing the narrative. Young people are not lazy, they want to be introduced to money economy. Can coffee bring money? We must show the young people that coffee can bring money and pay fees, can marry, can pay bills. And once we do that, like it was in Buganda, I've just told you that there was a competition between basically two tribes, particularly West Buganda and Acholi, with some addition from Laos. But what was the driving point of excellence in Buganda was coffee. So if we bring and introduce young people to money economy, and so coffee begins to become the money earner, or rather the money, then a number of things will change. Young people will not be lazy because they know there's livelihood in coffee, and the more you plant, the more you work hard around coffee, the better.
Thank you very much, Professor. Paul has gone off, but I'm also running out of my time. Professor, could also give us your last words now. As we close this, you normally stand when you
Yes, exactly that. Lutwa, one wabero kachabe kilo the karmalaj. Ne loteno actually may come dom kom giwaj. Loteno pan magi aki actually pedong ki karpen. Dai dong ti ato war pebe mon pe war cho pe war mon. The question of love, the question of education of performance, the question of hard work is around money, is around economy.
That's right.
When we had cotton, Acholi as a tribe was among the very best in terms of education, in terms of family ties and all of that. But what was the grounding point was cotton. But it is no more. Government has fortunately introduced us to coffee. What we are understanding is that cotton grew as cotton built us houses, cotton took us to first-class schools, cotton transformed the lives. To talk about hard work, let us show young people that you can make money from coffee. To talk about performance in school, we must have money, we must have a good income at home. The children must eat well, but when he goes to school, he is mentally stable. And that is when we begin to understand that coffee can bring us such an income. We are going to talk, and we are going to continue to talk about performance. But I want to say there is a close relation between performance and economy.
That's right.
For us to resurrect in terms of educational performance, we must stabilize our economy. And here we have coffee. Coffee has replaced the good cotton. Coffee has become the new economy. When you have a livelihood, as I normally say, when there is a quarrel at home, nobody is bad. What is bad is there is no money.
That's true.
Ka mama je kamwer tungulu. Tungulu na ko che apa. Ta bio nyanya. Nyanya ne dir romiwia. Rio tea fridge. There is meat in the fridge or freezer. There is some 5 million in the house safe.
That's right.
Which woman will complain?
No one.
A man comes home, his title is daddy. So we can fight domestic violence by creating a livelihood, and that is coffee.
Yeah.
Young people are not lazy. Show young people that you can earn from coffee. He will wake up before the elders wake up to go and work, because he wants this money to marry this beautiful girl.
That's true.
You don't need to force him anymore. He understands. And you cannot talk about money economy when there is no economy to make the money. So here is coffee. Lastly, performance. We need to ask ourselves in the 1980s, why were the people, for example, actually performing in class? Because the economy was good. And where was this economy? Cotton. So performance is not shouting on teachers.
That's right.
Performance is not pushing children to read harder. They don't have time to read. They are hungry.
That's right.
And why are they hungry? Because the father cannot afford food. So afford food for a child to stabilize, for the child to go to school and listen to the teaching. And that means you must have an economy. And today we have another opportunity. It is coffee. When coffee brings money, the home is peaceful. When coffee brings money, the children's necessities of going to school, including food, is catered. A child is stable for classroom. And the teacher no longer shouts because he has a learner who is now ready to learn. So our performance is coffee. Our domestic problems can only be resolved. Coffee. You want a hard-working youth? Coffee. You want responsible men? Let them start seeing the value of coffee. They will abandon beer. Because all of them will have become born-again coffee producers. There is no time for Marua. They are now born-again coffee producers. Thank you.
Professor, thank you. Let's